Hello and welcome to the Women of Steel podcast. We're the podcast that celebrates female leaders, trailblazers and those at the beginning of their careers in steel to learn more about the amazing 11% of women in our industry and hopefully encourage some more in too. I'm your host, Abby Thomas, and it's great to finally be back in Port Talbot today in the sunshine after an extended break over summer. In our last episode, we spoke to Area HR Manager Tuesday Ibbotson about everything from the importance of allyship to the Barbie movie and making Tata Steel one of the UK's most inclusive companies, because why can't that happen? And today I'm really excited to speak to Becky Waldram, who is Sustain at Swansea University's Impact and Engagement Manager. So let's just jump straight in. So Becky, welcome to the podcast. It's been lovely to get to know you over the past few months, but I think the last time that we saw each other in person was a little while ago, and a lot has happened in the industry since then. I don't know if you know this, but you're actually our first guest outside of Tata Steel on the Women of Steel podcast, so that's great. Obviously still very much an integral part of our industry in Sustain. We have so much to talk about, but I think the first and best place to start is you, because that's why we're here at the end of the day. So if you can start for the listeners, if you can just tell us a bit about Sustain. What is it, what's its purpose, and what do you do at Sustain?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. It's an honour to be your first external guest on the podcast.
Yeah.
So like you said, I work for Sustain, and that stands for Strategic University Steel Technology and Innovation Network. I'm based at Swansea University. We work with Sheffield and Warwick universities as well, but also with the large steel producers in the UK, including yourselves. And we're building a network of research happening in universities and then trying to align that with what you need in the steel industry moving forward in the future towards net zero, all these important things, trying to make that academic and industrial collaboration work really, really well where we can.
Like you said, so you're a network, so you're working with universities all over the country to help make our industry more sustainable, but you are based at Swansea Bay campus, aren't you?
Yeah.
At Sustain. I had the pleasure of visiting not that long ago, and I've got to say my mind was just blown, not by the projects that you're working on to make the industry more sustainable, as I said, but the people as well, just the incredibly clever people. I think I left that day feeling a bit overwhelmed for good reasons, but also on that day, it was the day that Oppenheimer came out in cinemas, so I was just like, whoa, what am I doing with my life? But you know, you've been in this sort of industry and sector for a while. Is it something that still blows your mind, or do you just get used to working with all that science and data every single day?
It blows my mind every day. The people and the equipment, like you said, the individual knowledge in such small areas, such niche areas of work that these people have is absolutely incredible. Some of the equipment you saw when you came round, we're looking at things on a micro, on a nano scale, and the things that people can do at that scale as well. Just all of it, every day. And I go into different labs that I haven't been in before. I speak to different people, and just the range of research in these such technical areas that I had no idea that even people were working on is so incredible.
It is incredible. That's the best word for it. But have you always been interested in working in STEM? Are you one of these people who, you know, like a classic engineer, kids who are just pulling stuff apart and putting it back together? Or have you sort of fallen into this industry? Because surprisingly, I think a lot of women on this podcast actually have said that.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mix of the two, really.
Yeah.
So I always had Lego as a kid, things like Meccano. I was always pulling things apart, putting things back together, mostly in how they came apart, driving my parents a little bit crazy probably.
Yeah.
And originally I wanted to do something like mechanical engineering, but I didn't quite get the maths grades, so I actually fell into materials engineering through clearing, a subject I'd never heard of before, even before I looked round universities. So we're kind of a mixture of both. I've always been interested in STEM, in science and maths, but never in the exact area that I've ended up in.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly niche, isn't it? Because, well, by trade, really, you are a materials scientist, aren't you? But now you're actually doing a communications job. And, I mean, for listeners watching, you'd probably think, how did you start there and then end up there?
Yeah, so I did my undergraduate at Swansea University, carried on and did some postgraduate, and then my first role out of that was Materials Public Engagement Officer. So it was about taking material science and engineering, which everything around us is made from a material, whether it's fabric on a sofa, whether it's steel in a steelworks, and actually telling people about that in schools, in the public, at science festivals, because I didn't hear about this subject. Okay, there's a little bit of physics, a little bit of chemistry, biology, maths, engineering, and because it's not a subject at school, materials, a lot of people haven't heard of it and don't realise it's something you can go into. So that's how I started moving away from research and into comms a little bit more, was trying to explain concepts not at a scientific conference, but to the public, at science festivals, at school, careers fairs, that sort of thing. And then it went on from there.
It sounds like you are one of those people who I was actually quite jealous of in school, really good at humanities subjects, because now you're doing a comms job, obviously, but then having that STEM brain as well. And I think it is really difficult to communicate some of this stuff, because like we said, the stuff you're working on, you could be working on at a microscopic level, and how do you sort of communicate that to a wider audience? And I guess it's important for you as well, because if we didn't have people like you in the industry, then how are you going to secure funding? Because you're government funded, is that right?
Yeah, so we're funded by the EPSRC, which is the government engineering and physics kind of funding body. It's been an interesting one, moving away from that very technical side, like you said, but you almost, the more you're trying to explain it to someone non-technical, the more you have to understand it yourself. So I've actually always struggled with the humanities side. English was by far my worst subject in school. So yeah, that's the bit I've had to really work at. And I think it's interesting because sometimes people have to work at the technical knowledge. I've definitely had to work on the humanities side. But being able to explain something really complicated in a simple way, I wouldn't be able to do that without having that engineering background. So I think the training isn't necessary for me for the type of role I do, because in Sustain we've got so many different projects in different areas. I definitely don't understand all of them fully, but having that technical training helps me pick up the bits I do know to then explain it in a more understandable way.
Yeah, it's so interesting for me, because really I'm the reverse. You know, I did a journalism degree, as you know, and then I've ended up here in the steel industry with really no technical knowledge or background, at least in the very beginning. So it's just interesting, really, how we're the flip side.
I'd say that's much harder.
Yeah.
Definitely much harder. Although, like I said, humanities is never my strong point, but there's a lot of acronyms they use in technical areas, and even learning those words and then what those words mean within that is quite difficult sometimes as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I wanted to speak to you a little bit about what's going on in the industry. Since we last spoke to you at a recent conference in Birmingham on Steelcast, our other podcast, we hadn't yet announced our proposed journey to decarbonisation, and obviously that would be electric arc furnace steel making at Port Talbot. And you spoke about a few things when it comes to decarbonisation. You said that, you know, there could be a skills gap that we're dealing with, but also there could be a lot of opportunities when it comes to sort of implementing that new technology. So I just wanted to know how you feel in post-announcement, and are your thoughts still the same?
Yeah, it's really interesting and great that there has been like government and company announcing investment in that sort of steel making in Port Talbot. It's an interesting one in terms of skills, because there are going to be some significant differences between how the steel is made. And I think it's being open with people, letting them know what those differences are, giving them opportunities to train, to learn about these new techniques. Obviously, scrap is going to make a big part of that. And obviously in the UK we actually export a lot of scrap at the moment, so we're going to need people who can look at that material, see whether we can actually use it in the UK, and lots of research is going to be necessary into looking at that material coming in, and also what material is coming out of an electric arc furnace as well. So there's lots of potential for jobs and research in the area with the announcement.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important that we have research hubs such as yourselves on our side to implement that really important research. But another thing that you touched on in that podcast with Gareth Brooks, you spoke about sort of attracting more women towards the industry and people from minority backgrounds, which is obviously an ongoing issue, and one of the reasons really why this podcast exists, to show that there is a space for everyone in the steel industry. How do you think that we deal with that issue? Is it simply by being more visible? Because I know that you do a lot of outreach work, and I mean a previous role that you did was pretty much dedicated to tackling that issue, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is, you see what you can be almost. So if you see someone who looks like you or has characteristics like you in a certain job or a certain industry, people start to think, oh, that could be for me.
Absolutely.
So a lot of what I enjoy about going out into schools is not just going out myself, but taking a diverse range of people from the academic teams with us, so people can see that actually there are quite a lot of different types of people working in the steel industry, in steel research in general, and across science and engineering as well. I think there is a big gap, not just in manufacturing, but across all areas of engineering. A lot more people are seeing, oh, that could be for me now. And I think the point is not necessarily to say you must do this. It's to show that there is an opportunity there. If someone is interested in something, they will be supported. And there are networks. I know you've got a great women's network and other networks in Tata Steel, and that those are there to support people who want to come into STEM and into this industry.
Absolutely, because you are actually in a network, aren't you, an outreach network still, and you do a lot of work with local schools to try and encourage and promote STEM subjects.
Yeah, we've got a group called Discover Materials, which is a network of 10 or 11 universities across the UK, which means we can reach lots of people across the UK to let them know about material science and engineering, and just not having to travel long distances, to be able to send people locally, and to be able to go into schools multiple times and see that difference having an effect on people is really exciting. And then seeing people apply to come to university, or for yourselves to come into apprenticeships, that sort of thing, that you've spoken to at a school or a careers event, and they're like, oh, I remember you. And that's just, it's the best feeling, I think, because you're like, oh, it really has made a difference to someone's life.
But like you said, I think it's all about planting the seed as well, just letting people know what's out there. Because if I'm honest, I don't feel like I had that in school. And like I said, I'm not from a technical background. If you told me like 10 years ago when I was still in school, you'll be working in the steel industry, I'd say you're lying. Because I didn't know that there'd be a career in this industry for me. So that's why it's so important, and it's something that, you know, we continue to talk about on this podcast for obvious reasons. But I'm just wondering as well, what's the gender split like in your teams at Sustain?
So in the whole wider academic team, I'm not sure of the exact split, but we do have a good number of female and diverse background people on the team. Within my direct team, our operations team, we are pretty much all female.
Wow.
Which is a very interesting place for me to be in, because it's not somewhere I've been before in engineering, and it's a very different dynamic.
I can imagine, because I think, you know, when you're working in a male-dominated space, you get used to working in certain ways. So has it affected your work, both how maybe when you're working with mostly male teams before and then compared to now, do you find that you work differently?
I think I do, and I think I've only noticed it since I've not been working in an all-male team, because it was just, you know, normal before. It's not big things, but it's little things like the way you put a point across. Like in a room full of men, I want to make sure that I'm going to get my idea across in a really clear way, and it's not going to be a silly idea. Whereas, I don't know, I found in the team of women, like, we can more share ideas that aren't fully formed. I find that a bit more comfortable, and maybe that's a me thing rather than environment, but sometimes the environment makes you feel more comfortable to share ideas and to discuss things more as a group, rather than having to have that perfectly formed idea before you want to share it with anyone else.
I know exactly what you mean, and I think it's something I've always been conscious of, and I used to think the same thing, is it me? And you know, the words imposter syndrome I think are flying about more now than ever, and it's something we've definitely spoken about loads of times on this podcast, but I think it's so prevalent, and yeah, I think sometimes, not to get too sort of like political and sociological, but I see so much discourse online about femininity as a performance and all this sort of stuff, but I think everyone has like a sort of front stage and backstage, and yeah, I think it is a little bit more difficult for women sometimes to put their ideas across, and like you said, you feel like you need a fully fledged idea to put your hand up in the room and feel like you're worthy to do that. So yeah, I think a lot of people definitely feel that way.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Do you have a mentor though? Has there been anybody in your career at any point while you were studying at Swansea University, or now, that you still look to for advice or support, whether that be male or female? Or
Yeah, I think in school it was a design and technology teacher that actually sent me down. He gave me, lent me a book on manufacturing technologies for about, you know, all sorts of different materials, woods and metals and everything. And it was looking at that made me start to think about how products are made and how things are designed. So that was a really big influence on me choosing to do engineering over computer science, because that's what I was considering at the time. And then in the university, I think the project director, we've got Professor Cameron Pladell-Pierce. He's a massive advocate for EDI within Sustain and across the university as well. And it's really great to have someone like that who I can go to with ideas and just talk about different things that we could do, what might and might not work, and have someone senior who's on board with getting more diversity in the team and in the wider steel industry.
Absolutely. I think everybody needs a good support network around them, and I think it helps massively having someone like Cam on your side, but also mostly a female team as well, which I'm really surprised at. I think, yeah, that's incredible. You've spoken a little bit about what Sustain does. What does the future look like for Sustain? And I'm going to ask you a similar question about yourself in a sec.
Sustain, so we've got about 3 years left on the project. We're just winding down some of our existing research and starting up some newer projects for this second half. So we're just getting like all the impacts and outputs together for that. And then moving into that new research. We've got a conference coming up, I think it'll be July 2024 on Bay Campus, so a lot of work's going into that right now and seeing what more collaborations we can develop, working closer between academia and industry, and hopefully helping solve some more of your problems.
Yeah, and can people get involved? Because, like I said, you did a lunchtime lecture today for the Young Professionals Network, and you did mention a few networks that people might want to get involved in. I'm thinking for listeners who maybe want to dip their toes into the world of STEM or feel like they might be able to contribute something to ongoing research and projects. Is there anything people can do?
Yeah, so our annual review document for this year, there's lots of videos that people can watch to see the sort of thing we do, and if there's anything that's of interest, there's our website that people can go on and get in touch with us to talk about. We do run events and workshops, which are normally either on our social media or website. And this conference next year, I think it's going to be a great chance for lots of people to get involved who aren't necessarily already involved in the project, and hopefully some more people from the businesses to come along and learn more about what we do and the steel industry.
I'm really looking forward to that conference. I'm definitely signing up as soon as you send out that invite. But just to close, really, I always try to end with these two questions, which I feel like can be a little bit daunting, but I'm going to ask them anyway. Where can you see yourself in the future is the first one.
I've always struggled with that one. And it's a really interesting one, because I did my undergrad and they offered me a master's and I was like, great, I don't have to think about it, there's a master's, and the same for the NGD. And when I left that, I was like, oh, what do I do? And then this opportunity came along. So I've never really planned beyond kind of the end of the NGD, of the research I did in the university. So at the moment, I'm just almost seeing where this goes, because before this role, I hadn't done any graphic design, any sort of recording podcasts, that sort of thing. And there's a lot of design stuff I'm getting involved in now, and I'm quite enjoying like graphic design side of things. Longer term, I really don't know. I'm curious to see where kind of Sustain goes over the next 3 years and see what opportunities that brings. But beyond that, I don't think I really know at the moment.
And what about hobbies and interests? I know that you are a proud dog mum as well.
Yeah, I've got a little sausage dog called Branston. Gets me out the house, walking, love walking, different places, especially autumn colours, love getting out and seeing that.
My absolute favourite.
And I dabble kind of like in interior design as well, so you know, we've got loads of fancy wallpapers, all sorts of painted things over our house. It's lovely to have things. I like working with my hands, being able to sand something down and paint it, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And so closing question then, and I'm sure you'll have loads of things that you can say, but is there a piece of advice that you've got? It can be one, it can be more than one, for the listeners. You know, they could be at university, maybe they're picking their A-level options, I don't know, maybe they're at a crossroads in life, or they're even thinking about entering this kind of industry or STEM. Any advice for listeners watching?
I think it's find out as much as you can about as many different areas. So if it's like someone going into A-levels, try and talk to as many different like subject tutors as you can, find out about those subjects, maybe even look at universities and see what courses they offer. And you might come across things like materials, for example, you've never seen before. And I think it's just trying things, asking people questions. Like at that kind of 16-year-old age, I wasn't really sure if I wanted to speak to people. I was a bit shy. But even if you like send someone an email or a message, just try and talk to people where you can. And if you find something isn't for you, it's not a failure to choose not to do it anymore. It's actually a big success. And because you've tried something, you've learned that that isn't for you. So you almost learn as much from, I don't like the word failure, but you learn as much from failures as you do from successes.
Absolutely. And like, you know, you didn't have, let's say, a traditional route into the industry, because you got into the industry, like you said, or university, through cleavering. So, and most people might think, oh gosh, you know, but
it didn't matter.
That's how it happened, and it worked out perfectly for you.
Best thing that could have happened. Yeah, I didn't get the A-level results I expected. Got offered, it was sports materials engineering, so something completely
really
different.
Niche.
But you know what? It gave me that introduction to university, made me want to carry on. Never would have known about materials engineering otherwise. No. So, yeah. Good, happy accident.
Yeah, I think it was definitely meant to be. Well, Becky, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It's been lovely to learn a little bit more about you. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to that conference as well. So yeah, and where Sustain goes in the future. So thank you, and I'll speak to you soon.
Brilliant, thank you for having me.
Thank you. It was amazing to catch up with Becky on the pod and learn more about Sustain and how they are literally helping to sustain the future of the UK steel industry. I think a main takeaway for me, as always, is visibility, representation. Becky's done a lot of outreach work in her career, and I think we just need to get the word out there. How are women, girls and people from minority backgrounds going to know that there is a space for them in this industry if they don't know what's available to them? Like I've said a million times on this pod, I couldn't imagine myself in the steel industry, and neither could Becky really either. It helped that she had a STEM background, but now here she is doing an incredibly niche and pretty cool job actually communicating the fantastic stuff that Sustain and other research manufacturing hubs across the country are doing to help our industry move forward. So another great chat. Looking forward to catching up with our next guest, and talk to you all soon.